I'm a teenage boy, and I live in a city near London. It was a Saturday afternoon in the middle of September, around 4:30 p.m. I was watching sports and getting sleepy because of a busy school week with exams. I was home alone because my mom and dad were working long shifts, and my sister was at a friend's house. Everything was going okay until the TV suddenly turned off. I tried to grab the remote from where I left it, but it wasn't there. I thought maybe I was just tired, but then I found the remote on a table near the sofa. I continued watching TV for about 15 minutes, and then the TV turned off again. That's when I started feeling a strange and uneasy sensation. I tried to ignore that weird feeling and reached for the remote again, but once more, it wasn't where I left it. Now, the uneasy feeling was really strong, and something inside me said I should go upstairs. So, I went, but the door to the TV room was locked. I got really scared, feeling like I wasn't alone. I tried to open the door, and as I did, I felt a cold hand grab my shoulders, with sharp nails or claws digging into my skin. Everything went dark suddenly. I think I passed out. When I woke up, I was in my bed, the sun shining through my window. Surprisingly, there were no marks on my body from where I felt the hand or claws. It was morning, and I could hear my sister and mom talking downstairs. I thought the whole thing was just a dream. Maybe my mom brought me back to bed, and I was too tired to remember. I quickly forgot about it. The second weird thing happened after a long day at school. I was coming back from football practice around 6 p.m. Waiting for the bus with my friend at the bus stop, that uneasy feeling came back, not as strong, but I knew it. I got on the bus, listened to some music, and went home. When I got home, I felt tired, so I went to bed. But around 3 a.m., I woke up feeling strange, like someone was in my room with me. I tried to go back to sleep, but it felt like I couldn't move at all. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The uneasy feeling was really bad, and I felt that cold hand grab my left ankle again. I thought I was going to pass out. Then, I heard my mom getting water. Finally, I was able to make a sound, even though it was quiet. My mom heard it and rushed upstairs. The weird feeling slowly went away. If my mom wasn't there at that time, if she didn't hear me, I don't know what would have happened that night. I haven't had anything like that happen since, and I hope it never does again. My uncle told me a story that I heard a lot when I was a kid. At that time, I thought it was just a made-up tale because he liked to play tricks and joke around. Recently, we reunited after many years, and he visited our first house where my fiancée and I live. We spent the evening showing him around, cooking dinner, and ending the night with some drinks in the living room. It was nice to catch up with him after so long. As we talked about our wedding and the house, the conversation shifted to unusual experiences. He asked if anything strange happened to us in the 4 months since we moved into the new house. Luckily, I told him that nothing strange happened at our new house. His question about ghosts in the house made me remember a ghost story he told us when we were kids. I asked him if it was a real story or just a joke. Then, something changed in his mood. He stopped talking, looked down at his drink, and finished it. It seemed like he hadn't thought about that story in a long time, and talking about it brought back some scary memories. He said, "Get me a bourbon and you'll have your answer." The night, which was fun and relaxed, suddenly felt serious. Still, I got 2 whiskey glasses and poured our drinks. The mood was ready for the story because the sun had almost gone down behind the trees in our backyard. Night was coming quickly. Just like you right now, nothing strange happened in the first few months after I bought that townhouse. I moved in January of 2001, and everything was fine. One Friday, during the first summer in the house, I left for work in the morning and came back home around 5 p.m. When I got home, I went down to the basement to give some food to the cat. My cat liked spending time in the basement a lot. The basement was like another room with furniture, so she had plenty of space. When I went down there, I saw the light was on. I thought it was strange. Maybe I forgot to turn it off before going to work in the morning. So I didn't think much about it and turned it off. Later, after I had dinner, I went to the basement again to check on my cat. Once more, the light was on. This time, I was sure I had turned it off. It made me feel uneasy, but I thought maybe I had accidentally pressed the switch at the top of the stairs and that's why the light was still on. Then, I remembered to check the switches in my head and made sure both were turned off. I thought the light should be off the next time I went down there. So, I went back upstairs to relax for the night. I sat down and watched a movie. Time passed quickly, and before I knew it, it was midnight. I had forgotten about the weird situation earlier until the movie finished. That's when I had to go back to the basement once more to check on the cat. I walked down the first set of stairs and reached the landing. My worst fears came true when I turned the corner and saw the light coming up from the basement. I was at home alone. I couldn't believe what was happening. I needed to check and make sure there wasn't someone in my house. I looked through all the rooms in the basement, and there was really nobody there. That's when a strong feeling of fear took over me. I thought, maybe my house is haunted. I hurried to the stairs, and just as I did, all the lights went out. I screamed and ran as fast as I could up the stairs. I closed the door behind me and ran out of the house. I sat in my car in the driveway for a bit, trying to catch my breath. I sat there, staring at the house, not sure what to do. I told myself, I have to be brave and face whatever is going on. It's my house, so I went back inside. I went to my bedroom and stayed awake for hours. Every little sound made me jump. Eventually I fell asleep, but after that night, I never slept well in that house. As I listened to the story, it matched what I remembered, but knowing it really happened kind of scared me. We both looked at each other, not saying much. We finished our drinks and he said, "I hope nothing like that happens in your house, but you always have to be careful. I don't think it was a bad presence, just a spirit letting me know they were here too." After that, we called it a night. As I lay in bed, I thought about the story. I just hope after 4 months living here, there's no spirit waiting to say they live here too. When I was 14, I played softball. I just got a new bat and a bag for it. I used to keep my window unlocked in case friends or my boyfriend wanted to leave a note. I never worried about locking it until that day. It was 7 p.m. My parents and sister were at the store, and I was alone for hours. I was downstairs watching TV when I decided to pack my new bat bag. Almost done, I realized I left my new bat upstairs. I wanted to pack it so I wouldn't forget it tomorrow. I ran upstairs to my room and grabbed my bat, and as I turned to leave, I heard something. I turned, and I froze. My heart stopped when I saw a man I did not recognize crawling through my unlocked window. I watched him as he made it into the middle of my room. When he reached out for me, I remembered the softball bat in my hand. I closed my eyes and swung as hard as I could. I heard a deafening crack, and then I heard him tumble to the ground. When I opened my eyes, he appeared to be unconscious. I bolted out of my room and down the stairs, twisting my ankle along the way. I dialed 911 as fast as I could, telling the operator what happened. Me, being stupid, I hobbled upstairs to check if the man was out cold and to grab my ankle brace. But when I arrived, my room was empty and the window was wide open. When the police arrived, I gave them a brief description of the man. I never got any updates as to whether or not they found him. I got in trouble for unlocking my window, and now I leave it locked, and it's going to stay that way from now on. I'm 16 now, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. If you take anything away from this, remember, lock your windows, and it doesn't hurt to have a baseball bat in your room. Back in the summer of 2020, I was traveling with my partner to Boise, Idaho from Colorado to visit his family and stay for a camping trip. This trek is nearly 15 hours long, and while you can do it in a day, it's better if you stop to rest. Having lived in Utah at one point in time, I was very eager to show him the natural hot springs in Spanish Fork. They're located deep in Diamond Fork Canyon and require a 45-minute hike from the parking lot. Still, we were both excited to get out and get moving after 7 hours in the car. When we arrived at the first parking lot, however, the gate was shut and locked tight. A sign taped to the metal read, "Closed. Absolutely no access to hot springs. Fines 2,000 max," or something to that effect. We were bummed, as the virus had shut down many things, and we figured that this was outside, so there's no way they were going to close it. After some research on the government website, we discovered that a body had possibly been found in the hot springs and was likely the cause for the locked gate. Sad and tired of sitting in the car, we drove back down the canyon road to find a spot to camp for the night. Most of the more established campsites were closed due to the virus, or were already taken for the night. This was fine since we prefer more dispersed camping anyway, so we picked a random road to turn on as we drove closer to exiting the canyon. Most of the road was a well-kept dirt road. We passed some promising spots near a creek, and maybe 2 or 3 other people were already set up for the night. We wanted to go a little farther to see if there was anything with that wow factor. Sounds funny, but some sites just give off that. This is the one feeling. Finally, we came to a dead end on the main road with a fire mitigation road to the right. At this very spot, there was a strange boulder with some type of inscription on it. I had to investigate. The inscription read, "Diamond Battle, June 20th, 1866. No way, a memorial for a battle that happened right here." A feeling of uneasiness and, oddly, respect washed over me. After traveling up the fire road and not finding what we were hoping for in a campsite, we decided to pick a spot by the small creek we passed on the way in. It was getting dark quickly, but we set up our tent in no time at all and got a fire going. The creek was loud, but peaceful. Though ever since I read that inscription, I couldn't shake this strange feeling. I'm not a paranoid person, but I kept feeling on the edge of my seat, like something was watching us from the woods just across the water. As the night grew darker, this feeling grew stronger. I decided I didn't want to be in the open anymore, and I retreated to the tent to get some rest while my partner stayed up to enjoy the fire. I snuggled into our sleeping bag and exhaled comfortably, listening to the creek that was now much quieter and was a bit farther from the tent. I started to drift off when I heard it, soft chanting, rhythmic drums. My eyes shot open. Was I really hearing that? I strained my ears to listen over the running water. I couldn't quite get a clear sound, but it was definitely there. This is when I noticed the ground was also rumbling, as if horses were stampeding down the road 100 feet from our site. I didn't know if I should get out to tell my partner or not, but I had the strange feeling that if I said it out loud, it would make it more true, and that an army of spirits would spring from the trees and into our campsite or something. Before I could make the decision, I was dead asleep. This was somehow the most peaceful slumber I had ever had. The next morning we packed up our tent and left no trace that we had ever spent the night by Little Diamond Creek. When I finally entered cell service, I did a Google search of that memorial in Diamond Fork, Utah. It turns out there was a battle there between the Utes and the Mormon militia, and lives were lost on that mountainside. After reading this, I decided to tell my partner what I heard last night before falling asleep. I told him about the chanting and the drumming and even the stomping of horses. He looked at me in total disbelief and said, "I heard the same thing." I suppose I was only in the tent for about 10 minutes before he grew uneasy, standing alone by the fire, hearing this distant chanting and drums. He entered the tent and underwent that same peaceful sleep that I had. I feel as though we were being watched over by some of the Native Americans that lost their lives there. I managed a resort in the Adirondack for several years. The place is old and rustic. It's miles from civilization and very peaceful. It was built in 1920s and had somewhat of a sordid past. It was built for a Canadian senator who would run rum down from Canada during the Prohibition. We still had the underground locked safe room where he would store the booze, as well as hidden booze hiding areas underneath some of the cabins. Calvin Coolidge stayed at a camp across the pond during his presidency and would visit my camp, for the spirits, I'm sure. Anyway, I met a girl and decided to sleep out under the stars on the camp's peninsula. It started to rain, so I suggested we sleep on the screened-in porch of the boathouse, which I thought was a pretty good compromise. So, after we were all set up, it was getting pretty late, about 1:30 in the morning or so. We were laying there, and I was all tossing and turning because I'd been asleep and woken up, so I have a hard time falling asleep after stuff like that. We'd been laying there for about a half an hour or so when I heard the bathroom door open in the boathouse. It couldn't have been anything else but that door. I did all the maintenance on those old buildings, and oiling that particular door was on my work list for the next day. I knew exactly what it sounded like. My first thought was that it was my boss, the owner of the camp. She is notoriously nosy and has been known to spy on the staff in their staff quarters. So she was my first logical thought as to who had made the noise. Why she would have been hiding out in the men's bathroom in the boathouse for over an hour is beyond my comprehension. I proceed to hear footsteps walking across the boathouse, down the 3 steps, onto the dance floor, and stopping right in front of the door to the screened-in porch. I lay there, just waiting for the door to open, and for my boss to call my name. As the minutes stretched out, I started praying that she would open the door, walk away, sneeze, dance the funky chicken, anything, but there was nothing. The rest of the night I stayed up, stiff, straight in my sleeping bag. No receding footsteps, no door noises, no nothing. Just my girlfriend, myself, the night, and an empty boathouse. The next morning, my girlfriend, she wasn't at the time, but she was the 4 years that followed, rolled over to me and immediately asked me about the footsteps the night before. She had also stayed up all night, and she was terrified. We never went into that boathouse again. I unfortunately had to go to the boathouse myself on a daily basis. Everything was cool during the day. At night, I had to turn all the lights in the camp off. This is something I've done every night for the past 3 years. However, ever since that, there was always a sense of dread going in there, being alone in the dark in the boathouse. The worst part is that there's this enormous hanging bed in there in front of the fireplace. It was for the former camp owners to take naps on during the day, hung on chains, so that the bed could be lifted out of the way for entertaining guests in the evening. Every single night that bed was swinging, a 175-pound bed swinging on its chains in the darkness of the boathouse, until my last day at that camp.
In a small town in Ohio, there is a very old house. A house I got the pleasure of moving into when I was 12. My father decided to buy the house out of the blue, and within a month, we were moved in and settled. The house was nice. To the right side of our kitchen, we had this basement. We built onto that house, adding an attached garage next to the dining room, with a mudroom and laundry room. Now, my brother and I always had a lot in common. He was only 4 years younger than me. The biggest thing we had in common was how odd we were. Dad always said we were weird kids. Well, the 3 of us, my 2 brothers and I, were always home alone after school until the parents got off work. When I got off the bus, I went straight to my bedroom to do homework and watch House. I noticed while studying during that time, I would keep hearing this tapping sound. It drove me crazy. I would hear it almost every day. On this particular day, I just had to figure out what it was. We hadn't lived in the house very long at that point, but the strange things had already started. I set my homework stuff down and listened for the sound. My brothers were already upstairs doing their own homework, although it sounded more like one of them was on their Xbox. I crept down the hallway, listening to the tap, tap. My heart began beating harder as I followed these taps into the kitchen. My breath caught in my throat as I realized it was coming from our basement. My hand trembled as I reached for the basement doorknob. "Don't." My little brother grabbed my hand to stop me. I jumped and looked over at him. "What's wrong, Trav?" I asked, feeling confused. He looked terrified and pale. "It's down there," he said softly. My eyes widened. "What? What is it?" He went quiet and looked to the ground. Eventually, he shrugged and replied, "Don't know." He was scared, I could tell. Normally, he wasn't like that. A few days passed by, and the tapping was getting louder, or maybe I just focused on it more. It was a Saturday, and my parents went out for a date night, so I was in charge of my brothers. They were upstairs playing games, and I was in the kitchen, making ramen. Then, the tapping came again. I couldn't stand it. I put the hot water into the noodles and walked to the basement door. I hesitated as I reached for the door handle. My heart was in my throat as I turned the handle. The hair on my arms and the back of my neck stood on end. I opened the door while I held my breath. It was so dark inside, I couldn't see anything. I reached for the switch in the darkness. With a click, it slowly glowed to life. I peered through the dim light, searching for whatever that tapping was coming from. At first, I didn't see anything, but my stomach was in knots. Something was down here. I crept down the steps, slowly, staring around the room. With every step, I thought my heart was going to force its way through my chest. The stairs creaked as I stepped off the last step, and an icy blast shot through me. Then, the tapping stopped. I was left in a deafening silence in that dark room. Chills ran down my spine as I forced myself to swallow. Then I heard this gurgling sound right in my ear. It made me jump, and I sped back up the stairs as fast as I could go. I swear I felt something watching me as I slammed the door shut behind me. "I told you," whispered Trav. I couldn't breathe. Gasping, I said, "What was that?" He didn't answer again for a long while, but eventually said, "It scares me at night." Trav was looking at the floor then. His words echoed in my ears. "Have you seen it?" I asked. He kept looking at his feet for a while, until his head slowly tilted up to meet my gaze. He slowly nodded. "What does it look like?" I asked, clasping his shoulder. He shook his head hard, and his eyes welled up with tears. I hugged him. "It's okay. We'll get it out of here somehow, I promise." I released him and took a step back. A few weeks go by, and we've ignored the thing lurking in the basement. The whole family was sitting at the dinner table eating dinner. It was a rare occasion when we were all together like this. I swallowed a bite of food and looked at my father. I remember him talking about work and how rough it was, being in charge of a company. After he was done talking, I side-glanced over at Trav, who seemed to be staring at the basement door. I cleared my throat. "So, do you believe in ghosts?" I asked out loud as if it were no big deal. Trav dropped his fork, looked at Dad, then back to me. "A ghost? What has you on that?" Dad chuckled. "Well, yeah, aliens, ghosts, Bigfoot. They could be possible. If you have water and you have light, you have to have life." My stepmom huffed. "What? None of those things are real." She laughed, traveled down at his food with a sad expression. Dad looked back at my stepmom and laughed. "Of course you don't believe," he said. They argued playfully about this for another 10 minutes. I knew that wouldn't have gone well, but at least I could blame it on my weirdness and move on. Later on that night, Trav knocked on my door. "Yeah?" I whispered. My parents were probably asleep, and I didn't want to wake them. My door opened, and Trav looked pale. "It came upstairs," he whimpered, avoiding my eyes. My heart pounded then. "What do you mean? How did it come upstairs?" I sat softly on my bed and motioned him over. He ran over and sat on the bed with me, grabbing onto me tightly. I wrapped him in another hug and tried to comfort him. I pulled a golden cross necklace from my jewelry box and put it around his neck. "Here, this will protect you. It used to belong to Grandma," I said. He looked at it and a smile appeared on his face. "It will?" His little voice shook. At that very moment, we heard a crash that seemed to erupt from the basement. We both jumped. "It's back in the basement," he stated. He pulled a piece of paper from his pocket and unwrapped it, handing it to me. On the paper was a child's drawing of a monster, a very off-putting monster. It was tall, had a long tail, and it had no face, but seemed to have 3 heads. "It has 3 heads?" I asked, startled by it. He shook his head and explained, "No, he can bring up heads around him. He doesn't have 1 inch." I blinked a few times, trying my best to understand that. Trev stood up then and tried to reenact what he had seen. In the end, I think I understood. It was some sort of shape-shifting shadow that changed every time he saw it, but it always had a tail and what seemed to be horns. Its head was part of its body, but would change every time he saw it. Around it, other heads would appear for some reason. Trav was very scared by this thing. I asked if it had eyes, and he stammered. I usually know, but one time he did. I reassured him again that it would be okay. I let him sleep in my bedroom that night. The following day, I knew my parents would be working very late, so I talked to a friend at school about the ghost thing in my basement. He told me about how I could get rid of it if I had a Bible, holy water, salt, and iron. He then told me to watch this show that had just started recently. I did as he said, and he was right. The show was pretty accurate with the research I'd done, but not precise. I didn't have holy water, but I did have an ironwood poker from our fireplace, and I also had a Bible. I gathered all the candles in the house. I set them in a circle in the dining room by the basement door. I also had some Wiccan chants my friend had printed off for me, and the correct way to open the gates as he put it. I read over the papers while I anticipated in what order I had to light those candles. I grabbed a compass to see which way north was. I opened each tower the way I'd read it, lighting the appropriate candle as I did. I stood in the circle as I was instructed and started one of the chants. Not long into that chant, I saw my brother in the corner of my eye. He was crouched near the kitchen opening, hiding behind the counter that sat next to the fridge. Then, tap, tap, tap. The tapping exploded right after my chant. I jumped, but made sure not to leave the circle. I realized at this point, I forgot to draw a circle at all around the candles using salt. My heart raced as a cold sweat leaked down my face. The basement door vibrated as the taps grew louder. The whole kitchen and dining room felt like it was shaking. I looked back at Trav, who was crying silently and holding a hand over his mouth. My own eyes started to water. I began shouting passages from the Bible, trying whatever I could to make it all stop. A deep growl sounded from the basement. Then this loud, high-pitched sound rang throughout the whole house. I jumped out of the circle then, grabbing my brother and running upstairs to my other brother's room. I slammed his door and panted hard. My other sibling, Cody, panicked as we barged in. After seeing our faces, he let it go. We went downstairs about an hour later, unwillingly. I had to make sure the boys ate dinner and that the house wasn't burning down from the still-lit candles. As I reached the kitchen and could see into the dining room, my mouth dropped. The boys were right behind me, and I saw Trav's eyes grow wide from the corner of my eye. The candles were gone. I searched the entire house, and when I arrived back where they were supposed to be, the candles were back. I'm not sure what happened that day, but those tap-tap-taps never stopped. I'm so glad we don't live there anymore.